Seems it's going to be another one of those days. The clients start hustling in as the streets continue to remain filled with life, footsteps, and the stains of unjustified blood. Of course, it becomes easier when you're numb to the pain like I am. Nowadays, it seems every alleyway in this godforsaken city has a new case for me to solve. But that doesn't bother me none, because it's what brings the money in when you're a world-renowned detective.
Hey, what's up? I mean, What do you want? Yeah, a better question. What are you doing? Would you believe thespianism? I would believe that is a women's coat you are wearing. Would you believe thespianism in a woman's coat? Why are you pretending to be a detective? Because pretending is just another word for acting, and when you act as something, I like to believe you basically are. Oh, you mean like how you pretend to be scared of women, when in reality it's women who are scared of you? Why are you here?
I have another request I need you to complete.
Oh, so it's cool when he does it, okay.
There exists this unreleased video game, Pac-Man VR it's called. I need you to find as much information on it as you can.
Yeah, absolutely not. Need I set a reminder that 1, I barely know you, and 2, the last time we did interact, you shot me in the foot! Oh, my foot! What was that? Duh! That was my flashback.
And I don't very much like you, nor do I even know your name, or where you're from, or even why you look like me. So what makes you think I would do anything you say?
Because if you don't, then I'll shoot you in the foot again?
You drive a hard bargain, I'll give you that. But I'm gonna have to...
Oh, my foot! What the heck? I was gonna say yes! Oh. Well, why didn't you? I was doing a bit, trying to make the build-up to my answer more dramatic. Sorry. Here is some leads I got. Yeah? Okay, have fun. Pac-Man! Are you guys tired of this fucker yet? The beloved video game icon and main mascot for the company Bandai Namco. A character whose backstory needs no repeating for how widely known this knowledge is. Right? I mean, come on, guys. It's Pac-Man. So in 1980, a small little cabinet game released to the public in arcades, simply titled Pac-Man. Created by the genius Toru Iwatani, the premise of said video game consisting of you, as the Pac-Man, running around a maze tasked with the simple assignment of eating every single dot on screen while avoiding these 4 ghosts who are, for the most part, hellbent on tagging you out. And it was a revolutionary concept that shaped video game history forever, left a cultural impact, and was the birth of a very beloved character, blah 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 blah. However, what I bet you didn't know is that this very beloved character has a dark secret. Something the company hid far down in the pits of obscurity.
The very same secret I plan on uncovering today, as there's yet to be a case I haven't cracked.
Yeah, that's because this is your first one. I thought you left. Dude, it's been like 2 seconds. You never gave me a chance. Boom. Pac-Man VR. Never heard of it before? Not surprising. Its existence was very short-lived. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, let's answer, what even is a Pac-Man VR? Well, the title is as self-explanatory as they come. It's Pac-Man, but you play it in VR. Fuck, really? Wait. I thought it was just in here. Virtual reality, if you will. But that only explains the basic idea. To be more specific, it was a video game that allowed for players to hop into the virtual world and essentially play the original classic Maze Runner arcade game we all know and love, recreated in 3D and viewed from a first-person perspective, with the obvious ability to move your head around as if you were actually there, similar to the VR games we know of today. It was complete with all the essentials too, from the maze to the pellets to even working ghosts that would chase you down. I cannot stress this enough, it was quite literally Pac-Man with a third axis. Now, with all that information placed directly into your brain, it wouldn't be surprising for one to assume this was some type of semi-recent project, taking place probably around the 2010s at the earliest, when VR gaming started to rise in popularity through general audiences, with consoles like the Oculus Rift via its easy accessibility. Well, what if I were to tell you that 1, you're wrong, 2, you're stupid, and 3, it was actually released in 1996? Yes, sir! Believe it or not, virtual reality technology has been a concept frequently dabbled in, even in a year as primitive as 1990. During that cold and unforgiving time period, video arcades, the place of many vertical gaming machines, back when these were as popular as ever, were starting to make somewhat of a financial comeback after the steep competition that was the introduction of actually good home consoles such as the NES. See, at this point, arcade machines were already too familiar of a concept to the vast majority of consumers by this point, ever since their popularity began to grow in the early 1970s. And as technology advanced even further, they really started to become more of a been there, seen that type of concept. Don't get me wrong, they were still pretty relevant and totes rad and everyone still loved them, sure. However, now, directly competing with them, we had games like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and even pre-existing arcade games like Pac-Man, introduced and neatly packaged into a convenient little entertainment box you could use in the comfort of your own home. An alternative many found preferable, especially here in the United States, as you didn't have to truck your ass all the way over to the local shopping mall to do this for 5 minutes. Riveting. Plus, it was a way for parents to maintain an eye on their children while at the same time keeping them entertained, so you know all the benefits were there. Though this would inevitably result in arcade machines having a huge financial decline. That is, until the glorious years of the early 1990s, when out of nowhere, video arcade machines blasted back up in popularity, gaining a massive resurgence, all thanks to the introduction of a revolutionary title known as Street Fighter II. In 1991. And boy, let me tell ya, whew, this thing was an immediate smash hit. The fighting game that rejuvenated the excitement people had for arcade games once more, and becoming loved by everyone in the world who isn't me. Good for them. Personally, I couldn't tell you what made this game in particular so substantial that it could save an entire form of entertainment. Maybe it was the detailed graphics, maybe it was the characters having individual personalities, maybe it was the advanced selection of moves you could pull off, or maybe it was all the above. Whatever the case though, it was a surefire fact that this single fighting game had charisma on par with the classics like Galaga, Pac-Man, and Donkey Kong, while carrying the second rise of video arcades on its back. And with that kind of success, naturally other companies would want to throw their hat in the ring as well to keep this spirit alive. Well, that and money, resulting in the birth of other popular fighting franchises such as Mortal Kombat, Tekken, whatever Virtua Fighter was, plus many more. And while still on the subject of titles that helped to regrow the popularity of arcade machines, on top of all of that, when the focus wasn't on developing fighters, more advanced games were starting to appear in the wild as well. 3D graphics, realism, polygons, the type of shit most people have never seen before, and racing games. It was mainly racing games. Between all this new stuff, it was obvious that arcade machines were back. But as we all know, when it comes to innovation, it's never enough. There can always be more ways to improve, more ways to create, and new concepts to discover. So what better way to capitalize on the rebirth of arcades than with an all-new type of way to play these so-called video games entirely? Specifically in a way that would make you feel as if you were, let's say, actually in the game itself. Introducing the Virtuality, a virtual reality device doubling as an arcade machine that, shocker, would play VR games. Now, ultimately, I'm sure that sounds somewhat confusing. Virtual reality in the 90s? How about you put down what you've been smoking, cause it's clearly laced. But no, I speak the truth, and I have the evidence right here. Okay, the evidence may need an explanation. First, however, let's talk about what is VR. Now, VR itself, as I've already said, stands for virtual reality. In other words, an artificial version of a reality similar to the one we experience in our normal day-to-day lives that's made up of code and displayed behind a screen. This screen can be seen while wearing a special headset made to track your head movement and replicate it, giving off the slight illusion of actually being in a different reality.
You feel like you're actually there.
Actually where?
In some made-up 3D world.
This so-called reality, unlike ours, however, could be anything we want. From skyscrapers to rhythm worlds to horror settings. Truly, a lot can be created and experienced with this concept that we could never really do in the real world. And, of course, being a machine that makes the player feel like they're actually in the place that's being displayed is most popularly used to play video games.
Entertainment fundamentally drives the technology more aggressively than any other market.
Now, I will say the state of virtual reality gaming is still very much a work in progress, as the immersion of virtual reality headsets are still very basic. Sight and sound are really the only senses accounted for, and on top of that, the headsets used can feel a bit uncomfortable and heavy for a lot of people when worn for too long. However, in the end, it's still a novel concept that's only going to improve with time. But truth be told, we're not worried about the future right now, nor should we even be focusing on the present. No. To really unravel the mystery of Pac-Man VR, we must rewind time to when virtual reality gaming took its first breaths of life.
Known as virtual reality, or VR, this new technology uses pictures and sounds to wrap around your senses. Imagine a place, and you'll be able to step into it.
So, the year is 1985. A group of people in a garage were just kinda like, you know what'd be cool? And this collection of people would eventually make up a group called W Industries, which was founded by Dr. Jonathan Waldron in 1987. They started off small, inventing stuff that would eventually become the basis of virtuality products, such as prototype glasses and other stuff, until the fabled year of 1991, where they would finally get the chance to release one of their most ambitious projects yet. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you once more, with actual context this time, the Virtuality Arcade Machine.
Now this little coin-operated machine is the first of its kind, and it is designed to toss you into a true-to-life world simulated by the computer.
A product built solely to play many virtual reality-styled games via a headset, which, if you'll notice, looks extremely similar to how we use VR nowadays. That being said, the Virtuality's concept and function goes way deeper than just the headpiece. But in order to dig up all the information required and really get to the bottom of this mystery, we're gonna need a bit of inside help. Preferably by someone who has had personal experience. Why are you looking at me? Well, where are they? What do you mean? This is your thing! Well, you're the one making me do this! Well, you're the one claiming to be a detective! Well, you! Make a good point. Alright, so I guess we should go ahead and get this interview underway, shall we?
Your friend.
The voice you're hearing is someone by the name of Don McIntyre, a very talented graphic designer who once worked with the company Virtuality back in the early 90s. But not only was he a former employee by the same company responsible for Pac-Man VR, he was also one of the two main people who worked on and created the game. Anyways, long story short, I managed to get in contact with him, and from there, conducted a less threatening version of an interrogation.
You mean an interview?
Yeah, that one. Which I will play for you sporadically when appropriate. Alright, so I'm gonna go ahead and just ask you first off, so you're a graphic designer, right?
Yeah, so the role I had, Brandon, at the time was, I think it was a 3D graphic artist, I think was the title of the job there. It was fairly, I mean, it was fairly early days in terms of developing 3D graphics for games. I mean, the PlayStation was only just upon us, I think. So up to that point, it had really been sprite graphics predominantly.
Right.
So so we were essentially 3D designers, but there weren't many around at the time because the home systems didn't exist at the time to support that. So so that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I was a 3D graphic artist, I think.
So with that out of the way, let's continue on with our little discussion around the very machine that led to the existence of our target of interest, Pac-Man VR. Now, as per the status quo of any early technology, the Virtuality here went through a multitude of iterations even after being released publicly. The first build to be available for general audiences was the 1000 series of machines, a series of which in itself had multiple versions. First, there was the SU unit, standing for Stand Up. Launched in 1991, looking like this, having the player, again, stand up in this little pod thing, complete with a single controller and big bulky headset. Perfect for stuff like adventure games and shoot-em-ups. Alongside that was the SD unit, an abbreviation for Sit Down, launching 2 years later in 1993, that instead took the form of a giant-ass chair with 2 joysticks on each side and a steering wheel. Now, as you'd imagine, the design was obviously intended for racing games, or, you know, just games where you pilot a vehicle in general. Manufacture a few of these bad boys and bada bing bada boom, you got yourself some quality VR machines for consumers to spend their money on and play. I do have, so as I've been doing research, I have had this one, question that I've been going back and forth on. So, the console itself, the VR machine itself, is that whole thing called the Virtuality as well? Because I've also heard it called the Visette. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, right. Okay, no, that, again, you've done your research. So, Virtuality is the company, and was the company. Mm-hmm. There was then they developed a number of generations of 2 machines, imaginatively called an SU and an SD, stand up or sit down.
Yeah.
So it was the first generation of each. So the first generation of stand up and sit down. There was the second generation, and the thing that you put in your head was called the Visette. So the Visette was, if you like, the trademark that was, and I still have one floating around here. So
really?
I'm sure I still have one. Yeah, maybe my parents have it or something. And they were actually really, really well designed. I mean, it felt, it wasn't as if the company was manufacturing off in the Far East. There's nothing wrong with that. They were doing everything in-house. They were designing the product design in-house, so the actual hardware, the chipsets, the cards, the graphics cards, everything was in-house, which was partly one of, I think, led to the fiscal challenges that went on there, because that just doesn't make any sense. You'd never do that now.
Yeah.
But at the time, they had this organization, and in one factory, in one building in Leicester. Yeah, it's strange to think that, isn't it?
However, while the 1000 series as a whole did have its fair share of games made for the console, such as titles like Dactyl Nightmare, Total Destruction, Gridbusters, Flying Aces, and many, many others, unfortunately, not a single one on this entire list was our aforementioned Pac-Man VR. Then Brandon, why even mention it? Because, idiot, in 1994, they made an upgraded model. Wait, that doesn't answer the question. In 1994, they made an upgraded model, and it had Pac-Man VR. The 2000 series, this thing was called, and physically, yep, it looked about the same as the 1000 variant, consisting of its own SU and SD units as well, being powered by an Intel 486 PC and using Motorola 88110 processors for said graphics rendering. Sound smart? Check. And believe it or not, the 2000 series also had games, if you could even fathom the idea. We got shit like Zone Hunter, Buggy Ball, Ghost Train, Dactyl 2, Race for the Eggs exclamation mark, and once again, many others. Like, again, Pac-Man VR. The Virtuality machines would also play these titles via what is called a CD-ROM, which were common use for data storage in many video games, especially around the 5th generation of consoles, and would display those games through the Visette's 2 LCD screens that both contained a resolution of 276 by 372. Yikes. And also, as a side note, at this point in time, in 1993, a group specifically dedicated to Virtuality products, called Virtuality Group PLC, was officially incorporated. Now, if we want to get really obscure and specific here, there was also, technically, a 3000 series model of Virtuality machines as well, which were almost entirely identical to the 2000 ones, just with, you guessed it, better hardware. This one even featured its own 2 versions as well. The normal SU unit that came included with gun, just a standard rifle for your generic shooting game needs, and alongside that, the not SD unit. There was no chair variant. No, instead we got the Total Recoil model, which was very similar to the standard one, only this time replacing the rifle with a replica of the Winchester 101 shotgun. Whatever the fuck that is. However, yeah, these were definitely geared more towards shooter games. Though that being the case, they were still backwards compatible with the previous model, meaning they could also play older 2000 series games, which yes, would include Pac-Man VR. So, alright, I've been beating around the dead horse long enough. Wait, hang on, let me redo that. So I've been hiding from the truth for far too long. But now I think it's finally time to bite the bullet, unmask this game, and find out what the Virtuality Group was trying to hide from us for so long. And after an excruciating, treacherous search on Google, I finally uncovered some proof. More specifically, a video showing us what this game actually played and looked like. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the world of Pac-Man VR. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the exit run. Ah, the game that was too advanced for the 1000 series. That is a low bar. Okay, so what exactly are we looking at? Good question. This was a video I found on YouTube, posted a good amount of years ago in 2008 by a user called Devil Master, showing what appears to be gameplay footage of the game itself being, well, played. Now, I do want to clear some things up before we start dissecting the contents of these few pixels here. Obviously, the real Pac-Man VR game itself wasn't actually this blurry nor choppy, only appearing that way here because of the very early and primitive capturing software used to record this gameplay in particular. I can assure you that the real thing people saw back then was 1,000 times better looking than this, probably. Anyways, from the very first seconds of footage, we are shown what appears to be a little intro cutscene of the Pac-Man playing his original arcade game, only to have his attention cast over to the Virtuality, which is a vastly superior piece of technology as clearly hinted at by the whoa! The process of putting on the headset commences, and then the title screen appears shortly after, and presumably once pressing start, the actual game itself will begin. Now, squinting real hard, we can see, what the game, for the most part, would have looked like in action. Again, for the most part. We got the maze, we got the ghosts, we got the dots, power pellets, and all the fun retro Pac-Man mechanics you could ever want. The little shortcut that teleports you from one side of the maze to the other is also here, represented by a swirling green portal, which is a nice detail. And, yeah, I can't stress this enough, this whole thing is quite literally just Pac-Man. The only real big change I noticed, besides the obvious, is this timer on the top left corner that counts down to something. I don't know, the video cuts out before the timer actually goes all the way down, but it does look like you can get extra time added onto it by collecting enough pellets to fill up this meter at the top. Still doesn't explain why it's here, though considering this is an arcade game, it could have something to do with limiting each player to a specific amount of time so they aren't playing the game for too long. However, yeah, I mean, that's about all there is to talk about for the most part. There's really isn't much to see here, because again, it's quite literally just Pac-Man. Did you know that? That's crazy. The lack of things to discuss is not a fault of the video. This game itself is just really simple. Although, as a totally unrelated side note, I will say everything on screen absolutely oozes primitive 90s technology, which in turn makes me remember the old Microsoft PC games I used to play as a kid. And I guess whatever makes me remember the moment my life peaked, at age 7 apparently, is a definite plus in my book. How did you get hired to work on Pac-Man VR? Was it like something like it was just a no-brainer to hire you, or was it something you applied for? Or?
No, it was so it was not nearly as sophisticated a process as you might imagine. So we're part of an in-house team. So we worked on all the titles. So we had 17. I'm calling it 17 people, and the studio we would just develop games based on ideas. So it really was quite utopia in that regard. We would think of an idea, and we would create a prototype or a demo that would exploit the benefits and opportunities that having this 3D world allowed. And then occasionally, through some part of the company that dealt with licensing, we'd have the opportunity to work on licensed games. So, and Pac-Man was one of those, in conjunction with Namco, obviously. There was another one, whilst I remember, I didn't work on this, but with Olin, the rifle manufacturer. We don't have too much of that in the UK, but that was the US-based deployment, I think. And Jaguar, do you remember the Jaguar console?
I do, yeah. The Atari.
Okay, so Atari, that's right. So we, in fact, and Martin Brownlow, who coded Buggy Ball, he went over and moved and worked on the Atari platform, and then his career just went stratospheric. If you Google Martin Brownlow, he's up to some very interesting things these days. He's a very clever guy. He drank a lot of Diet Coke, I remember. Gallons of the stuff. So I was just, I was not plucked from obscurity, unfortunately, Brian. I was literally the guy that was free to work in Pac-Man. That's as grandiose as it became, unfortunately.
Now, remember a bit earlier when I mentioned this elusive Devil Master who had uploaded the video of which we just looked at onto YouTube? Yeah, you may be wondering if this individual in question had also been the one to record it as well, and that's what I honestly thought too at first, but it seems that is actually not the case, something that was confirmed by Devil Master himself. Now, the footage actually originates farther back than that initial upload date of 2008. It appears to come from this website, created by Arcadian Virtual Reality LLC, who, upon closer investigation, seemed to be a distribution and manufacturing organization that at one point owned the rights to the Virtuality machines. And this is backed up by two things I noticed right away. One, this place looks old as shit, and two, this entire website seems to be a retired hosting grounds for all the Virtuality's products. At least I'm assuming it's retired, considering the website's early copyright date and the fact it looks like nothing on here has been updated in a long-ass time. Anyways, taking a look around, we can find paragraph descriptions of the Virtuality and its games, some cool looking photos of the machines themselves, video footage of multiple games being played, not just Pac-Man, that's pretty cool. But what I found most interesting was the system prices and rentals section, which led me to find out that you can, or at least could have at one point, rented out a Virtuality arcade machine, or possibly even bought one. Embrace the revolution! Only $900. For 4 hours? Jesus Christ! And that's only for the SU-2000 series. The 3000 series also seems to be available for rental at a very moderate $1,500. I somehow doubt that. Additional hours would also run the buyer an extra $100 or $200 for each machine respectively. But oddly enough, it doesn't look like the original 1000 series model had ever been put up for purchase. I guess why sell that when you have an inherently superior alternative? Though I definitely could did see some people wanting it over better models, especially considering it might have been cheaper. The SD units also don't appear to be listed here, but that I can understand more because goddamn. Now, if you thought all those prices were bad, check out how much it'd run you just to fully buy one of these things. My god, second-hand financial anxiety. Also, side note, I love how much they try and oversell their VR technology on here with descriptions like, the classic VR system. No other product is equivalent in price and performance.
Charge against the world's greatest virtual...
There sure isn't. Total recoil strength is its simplicity. You got that right. All players have to do is select a game, put on the high-resolution headset, pick up a gun, and fire away. High resolution? Anyways, circling all this back around to Pac-Man VR, however, we find that besides this singular gameplay video, there is also a page dedicated to the game itself, leaving behind a few, what I can only assume are in-game screenshots, some moving sprites of the Pac-Man himself, a logo, and an official description of the game. VR adaptation of the classic Namco arcade game. See the world through Pac-Man's eyes. Pac-Man fever is spreading again with this new, fully immersive 3D virtual reality game, in which the player actually becomes Pac-Man himself. Wow, they were right! I feel just like him! Ew, why the fuck is this here? Now, as cool as this is, unfortunately it doesn't really give us any new information we didn't know already, minus the more clear in-game screenshots. However, with a bit more digging, I found this. On the very same website, located in the 3000 series SU Unit Software Information tab, we find Pac-Man VR being listed again, with what looks to be the same description as before, just pasted over here. That is, until we read a bit more, God forbid. Retaining all the original gameplay, the VR version of this classic game now allows the networking of up to 4 players, enabling them to see, talk, and compete with each other in the same virtual maze while still trying to outwit the ghosts. Whoa! Multiplayer in my discontinued 1996 VR Pac-Man game? Ugh, other people. Yeah, apparently this game also had a multiplayer mode, which, according to this, just consisted of the same playstyle, only with more Pac-Men roaming the maze. It really is interesting to think what that might have looked like, considering all the players would be able to see each other. Unfortunately, we won't know anytime soon, considering there's quite literally no known footage or images of this game mode being used, so we'll just have to take their word for it, at face value. Although, if we were to add a bit more credibility, there is, or more rather, was a separate promotional page for Pac-Man VR on a different Virtuality website, simply called Virtuality.com, that, while is no longer accessible normally for whatever reason, has been archived online via the Wayback Machine. As you can see, it doesn't really give us anything new to discover, par for the course at this point, with lines of dialogue being almost one-to-one with the previous promotional page, except here, we get confirmation once again that yes, Pac-Man VR did indeed contain a multiplayer mode, so there's that at least. Okay, so let's do a recap here. 1991, an arcade machine called the Virtuality was introduced to the public in arcades with the sole purpose of playing video games in virtual reality. The console was a bit underpowered, so in 1994, a version 2 was launched, ultimately beefing the processors up a bit with a few other improvements. And after a decent amount of VR games hit the platform, showing off what this console could do, the company struck a deal with Namco to create a Pac-Man themed virtual reality experience for the 2000 series of Virtuality. Fast forward to 1996, and Pac-Man VR launches to some acclaim, and then what, the game just disappears? You know, after all this talk about how lost and obscure Pac-Man VR is, we never really took the time to consider why that happens to be the case. And cue the moment where I changed that. So, there may have been a few crucial details I neglected to mention about the Virtuality company, the Virtuality itself, and its lifespan. or more specifically, its downfall. I guess it should go without saying, but virtual reality tech in the 1990s was just not good.
Fuck, really? How's this keep happening?
Yeah, as cool as the idea may have sounded back then, virtual reality gaming was very much still in its infancy. A primitive piece of hardware that not only could have run games better, but also became outdated very quickly. Hell, it didn't even manage to live up to consumer expectations at the time of its release. Alright, maybe that's a bit too harsh. In all honesty, the Virtuality was really ahead of its time. It got the ball rolling for VR's inevitable success later down the line. Plus, the method they pioneered for head tracking is actually what the Nintendo Wii used to track its Wii Remote pointer. So it's their fault. They ruined gaming. Other than that though, the Virtuality's games also could prove fun, and it was a way to enjoy said type of media in a form no one has truly experienced before. So it's no surprise it managed to turn heads towards its novelty. However, in the end, that's all it was. A novelty. Anything can seem cool at first, but relying solely on a gimmick will only get you so far. See, this machine was primarily hosted at arcades, and if there's one thing you should know about places like that, is that the owners usually want to try and get as many people in and out of their machines as much as possible within the day to make the most money. And how do you ensure something like that happens? Limited play times. Now, let me set the scene for you. Imagine you're a casual video game consumer witnessing this new console called the Virtuality at your local amusement venue. Then, as you hook up the sweaty-ass, gross-ass, heavy-ass headset onto yourself and start up the game, you realize something.
Oh, shit. I don't know how to play this.
Again, it's the 1990s. This is the first time anyone's experienced this stuff in real life. You try your best to adjust yourself to this new environment and technology, while the seconds you paid for swiftly burn away. But alas, before you could even find out how to play, your time limit ends. And that's the main issue.
I think the present virtual reality games are very rudimentary. I think the graphics aren't very brilliant. I think the lag times are very difficult. I think the actual games themselves and the quality of the games, when compared to other computer games, just aren't very good. I think it's getting by on novelty and hype at the moment.
Plus, what makes things even worse is that it costs around $5 for like 5 minutes of playtime. $5 to just...
Don't know what I'm doing yet, but we'll get there.
The cost to play a game about $1 a minute.
35 seconds left.
To buy the technology.
And bearing in mind that these are coin-op machines, Brandon, you know, so so the whole experiential aspect was very different. You know, people didn't have consoles at home that allowed them to spend hours becoming used to an environment. They put £1 in, which is a lot of money in those days for it. I don't know what that would be the equivalent to in the US.
Maybe. I think I've heard it was like I want to say $5 for 5 minutes. I can't remember where I saw that, but yeah.
Yeah, but that sounds about right. So you had to provide to the user a sufficient level of value for that pound, for that $5. And the way you do that, I think, is to make it interesting for him or her. And make the attainment, the risk and reward thing, keep that balance right. So you provide the user with the sense that they are doing a lot more than they actually are in the experience.
Yeah.
You know, well, you'd never get away with that. You wouldn't get away with that on a console machine, because that would be, it wouldn't be seen as challenging enough, I don't think.
Now, granted, a lot of these machines would have attendees on standby to help the players out, getting them all started and set up, though this was at the cost of the business losing more money to pay them for their contributions, putting more pressure on the Virtuality to turn over a profit so it can justify its existence. It was a constant uphill battle, but in the end, efforts remained futile, with barely anyone coming back to the Virtuality for a second play after their first attempt ended in dissatisfaction. And that's not even mentioning the smaller issues with the arcade machine itself, like how moving your head too much would break the tracking easily, or how your entire vision would be pretty blurry with the Vassette's resolution on both LCD screens being a very minuscule 276 by 372 pixels. And also, there's the fact that some of the games playable on this thing were just a bit lackluster. Man, I'm glad the PS1 and N64 released around the same time as this, because my god, you guys were desperate for 3D graphics. However, Virtuality wasn't giving up just yet. Despite a now crumbling business, they continued to try multiple things, such as some commercial projects unrelated to entertainment, to more attempts of making a successful and fun VR game, with a huge standout in particular being a title called Buggy Ball, which was a multiplayer game where you would essentially try to kick a ball around and make scores using nothing but a car. Huh.
I worked in a game called Buggy Ball, which was fantastic. That there's footage of that somewhere online. And if there was a game that was destined to propel that sit-down machine to success, it would have been that one, I think, had the company not went under. And what that was based on is a game that they play in France, in beaches, I'm told, where you get guys with their hot rods and customized kind of Volkswagen Beetles punch a massive soccer ball around this beach on all the cars. They crash into each other, so it's almost like football with cars, but it was in a dome.
That wasn't all though. With nothing but determination for the life of a machine they truly believed in, the Virtuality group had one more ace up their sleeve with what was the biggest deal for a game they struck so far. A whole new attempt at gaining an audience once more. With Namco's full consent, was the introduction of Pac-Man VR. Oh, there it is. The game was released to the public in late 1996 to a staggering...
It's pretty cool, I guess.
Don't get me wrong, it's fucking Pac-Man. People are always gonna love whatever this yellow Tic Tac shit's out, especially if it's in an arcade. Shoot, even before the launch, the game was play-tested by general audiences at De Montfort University in Leicester, resulting in overwhelming positive feedback. However, while Pac-Man VR and many of the other attempts at not losing money were valiant efforts, the main issue now at this point was just that all these ventures came too late into the Virtuality's lifespan to save the company from financial decline. The prior big issues plaguing this arcade machine just hit the company too hard, and the attempts moving forward weren't turning out enough of a profit to undo all that.
If you look at what's happened in previous technologies where you get a new product, the people who start the product off, who are in first, generally don't survive. The people who survive, who survived, for example, in cars, were Fords and Chrysler and Mercedes, but they weren't the people who started. They were the Panhards, and we've never heard of Panhard. They've disappeared now. I'm afraid the same thing has happened to Virtuality. We have Sega, we have Nintendo, we have large American corporations and other Japanese corporations who are putting a lot of money into virtual reality. The odds on Virtuality surviving are not great.
Plus, another big contributing factor to the company's downfall was the high expectations of the public. Expectations that stemmed from baffling, unrealistic depictions of VR in movies that were popular at the time. Manufacturers would also over-publicize their system's capabilities, taking full disregard of the actual limitations in hopes to gather as much attention as possible, which, unsurprisingly, backfired and exploded in their faces.
Unbelievable! Now the future of this system is even more incredible than what we have now.
So with all that, imagine again living in the 1990s, hearing about this all-powerful virtual reality headset that's constantly getting hyped up to the high heavens, finally checking it out, expecting some shit like this, only to get... Yeah, so the company declared insolvent in 1997. As a direct result of that, over time, Virtuality machines slowly stopped appearing in arcades, and as the console housing the game disappeared, so too did Pac-Man VR. What makes this such a detriment is because it's not like a situation with old console games such as Nintendo or PlayStation where the original copies and ROM files are preserved all over the place along with emulators to play them. No, this was an obscure game made for an obscure and short-lived arcade machine constructed during the 90s, when preserving video games and making sure their legacy stayed intact wasn't something many people concerned themselves with, not to mention how new and primitive the internet and PCs were at the time. Mix that all together and you got yourself a hot heaping bowl of an almost non-existent chance when it comes to ever experiencing this game again. However, that being said, not all hope has been lost, for when they weren't indulging in illegal activity, people on the internet did that other thing they're really good at: digging as much as they can to find even the smallest scraps of information. And you know, despite everything, their efforts were not met with total failure. So now, I bring you Exhibit A, Pac-Man VR's digital existence. Somehow, by sheer will, people have managed to get their hands on the actual ROM file, aka a file containing the entire game's data. Okay, to explain how this happened, apparently not too long ago, the new and improved Virtuosity Tech website, a place run by the current owners of all the Virtuality products, more on that later, decided to sell copies of the original Pac-Man VR ROM on their website that anyone could have accessed and purchased for themselves. The page where this was possible is now down, so it looks like you can't do that anymore, which kinda sucks, because I totally would have bought one if I knew. However, point is, we now have access to all the game's data. Though, problem still. Sure, there's the game file right there, but a crucial piece of the puzzle is still missing to turn the slab of data into an actual playable video game. And that being the Virtuality's graphical processing unit. Or in other words, an emulator. Of which I reiterate, we don't have. Yeah, so that's currently where we're sitting on the situation. An unplayable ROM file. Cool. But you know, to lift spirits a bit more, something else actually useful did come out of this thing even existing in the first place, which is the fact that the original game's assets were dumped online, readily available for anyone, like me, to download and look through. Now, I bet you're wondering, how did this even happen in the first place? With some technical know-how, smarter ones than I managed to crack open the main game file and pull out all the raw assets that were used in Pac-Man VR. One quick Google search later, and I managed to find these so-called files uploaded to the Internet Archive website from a user that goes by the name of Pacnatic, who I did contact personally to slightly interrogate, which is also how I discovered the origin of these game assets. And when I say game assets, I mean everything that makes up this entire arcade game. I'm talking textures, models, sound effects, bitmaps, like what even is a bitmap? And here is where we get to learn a whole metric ton more about this elusive VR Pac-Man title, while also getting a better visual on some of the things we've already seen in that blurry ass video. First off, let's take a look at the stuff we've seen featured in said gameplay footage. Like these ghosts. Inky, Blinky, Pinky, and Clyde, with Blinky and Clyde's names being incorrectly swapped as per the status quo back then. These image files, however, only seem to show the bodies. Definitely a unique design, looking more like a blanket sheet, but I appreciate the bold direction. Their eyes and mouth do exist as well, being separate files that would get moved around the body in-game, giving off the illusion of looking around, as my miraculous mock-up clearly shows. What's even more interesting, however, is there is also beta versions of the ghosts that more resemble their sprite counterparts, with actually 2 beta versions of specifically Blinky, with very minimal differences. Alongside the ghosts, we got the remains of what was once Pac-Man himself, complete with the body, hands, joints, maybe? Eyes, mouth, and finally this choppy animation of his nose rotating that I Frankenstein back together. Oh, and get this! There seems to be 3 other versions of Pac-Man's body that have been recolored to represent what I'm assuming are players 2 through 4 in the aforementioned multiplayer mode, with player 2 being green, player 3 being red, and player 4 being purple. Funnily enough, while we're on the topic of multiplayer, there are also these textures reading 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th that, and this is only a guess, are meant to be used to show the final rankings of each player, revealing who won and who lost. Moving on, we can also find textures for the stage scene being played on as well, with things like the ground floor, the pack pills, the walls, clouds, and the portal. But what's even more interesting is the fact that a few tile sets for what seems to be an unreleased second stage in the game also reside here, just never getting used. We got ourselves this black and white tiled block, these wall textures, what seems to be the flooring, and this stone pillar looking thing. So, you said before, I think it was a comment on my old video about the game, that there were 2 more stages planned for the game. Do you have any more specific information on that?
You know what? I tried to find my sketchbooks, and I've obviously moved house many times since then, and I couldn't, sadly. But the next stage was going to be an Aztec temple, and I can reveal that. And so we had worked all that up. Where we hit some challenges there was, if I remember rightly, Namco were comfortable for us to release that first level, but they wanted more creative direction over any subsequent level, which I fully understand. Because we, as a small team, were used to just doing what we wanted, figuring things out. So I had this idea of one of these little kind of Mayan temple with, waterfalls, and I'd figured out a way of getting the water to look kind of semi-realistic and flowing down, and you can imagine almost a snakes and ladders style movement. But I did dramatically underestimate the strategy and the sophistication of the strategy that is plumbed into the first level. It's so well put together. There's a reason why that map is the way it is. So we didn't really get that far, but in terms of thematically, that was the plan. It was to create the second level. I can't remember what the third one was going to be, but the second level was going to be a little Mayan temple.
So what was the main reason for these stages not being included was because of the company going under, or?
Yeah, that was it. That was a great shame.
And thus, that's about all I have for the categorized images. So to finish off this section, here are a bunch of miscellaneous sprites I found that are definitely worth mentioning as well. We got the logo, this timer used in game, some arcade Pac-Man game sprites that were most likely used in that intro, a cherry, an orange, this HUD meter sporting multiple colors, most likely a separate version of the extra time meter, an emerald of unknown purpose, cool looking water, a few criteria prompts, door, and finally a shit ton of numbers and letters in this game's font. Oh, and also this. Recently, I think it was like back in 2021, the game files for Pac-Man VR somehow got around, I think because Virtuality Tech were selling off the original copies. So the original files for the game managed to get online. And people noticed that there was a like some sort of demon face sprite. I don't know if you've ever seen it before or know what we're talking about.
We always put Easter eggs into these things. So that may have been my doing. I remember for one of the games we did, which was a little bit cheeky, the second Dactyl game, the only other Scottish guy working there was the chap with Derek Pettigrew. He sat next to me, and we were cruelly called the Scottish Corner. The rest of the guys were all English. And so we had a tartan shield in this particular game. Now, if you shot it in a particular way, the shield would move, and you'd see our initials in this game. And so all the games had something like that. And if you knew what to do, I must have built that, Brandon, at one stage. I can't remember doing it, but I must have created it at some stage.
Do you remember specifically what you did on Pac-Man VR? Like, what did your work of the game entail specifically on your end?
So pretty much out with the coding of it, everything. So I did all the in-game graphics. I did the walk, which took me ages. The run that they had, and all the texture mapping. Yeah, everything you see there, I designed and created. Although I can't lay claim to the design really, because that was Namco. But the repurposing of that into a 3D environment. A guy, the developer, is a guy called Andy Reese. Really smart guy. I think he's out in Japan now. Hello, Andy, if you're hearing this. He was great, and so it was just the two of us. A two-man team for a project of that size you'd never do that now. It would be a cast of it would be scores of people, but no, it was just the two of us. So Andy did the code, and everything else I put together.
Interesting. Do you remember how long development lasted specifically?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me that. I think it was about 8 months. I think it was about 8 months.
Okay.
6 to 8 months.
And there we go. That's about all I got in regards to all the noteworthy textures. But there's still a bit more I want to talk about here. Of course, next up, we got ourselves plenty of sound effects that, while don't necessarily reveal anything too major, I will play for you anyways, just because I think they're cool. And to finally wrap this asset leak escapade thing up, we do have a massive pool of miscellaneous game files as well as model files, of which I have zero idea how to actually open and view, nor do I even know what most of these are for. Regardless, however, I felt it important to acknowledge their existence anyways, so everyone can truly know that, yes, they are here. In case those smarter than I would like to try and see what's inside some of these things. Maybe then we could actually get a good look at the in-game models that were used. But until that day inevitably approaches in the distant future of this majestical game of tactician we call life, much like a predator delicately approaching their prey, we must be patient and wait. God damn it, I'm fucking bored! And that's when I found something that truly piqued my interest. Or rather, someone. May 11th, 2022 is the date 2 videos were posted onto the site known as YouTube. Pac-Man VR in-game test without tracker, and Pac-Man VR booting. 2 pieces of footage that show off this very game of Pac-Man VR actually running. On real hardware, no less. These were both posted by a user going by the name Ariane Fugman. So a human being's behind this. Looks like I'll have to do a bit of interrogating. Who are you and what the fuck did you do? How was that? Was that good? What? I should just email them, huh? You should, yeah, that would definitely be better. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I just wanted to... Yeah, email us... Yeah. So, after another successful interrogation spanning multiple questions, I managed to learn a few things that might be of interest regarding the future and fate of Pac-Man VR. First off, the same person who posted those 2 videos actually owns 2 physical copies of the Pac-Man VR itself. One is a pre-release version, which is the very same version shown off here, and the other is the standard retail variant, which, according to them, unfortunately is missing the main binary for now. Alongside those, however, Ariane stated they also own a 3000 and 2000 series stand-up Virtuality units. So basically they have the original hardware and technology used to play this ancient piece of fossil. Got it. But what does that have to do with the future of said game? Well, I'm so glad you asked, real person I'm having a real conversation with. Cause believe it or not, Ariane, the same individual who owns all this stuff, is also working on a playable emulator for the 2000 and 3000 series of Virtuality consoles. One that, once finished, would be available for public use, eventually having it added to the program MAME, which, if you didn't know, is a public emulator program centered entirely around running arcade games. This application in particular is already well known for being the main go-to anytime you want to play a classic arcade title on your PC, and is something I have used before in the past as well. Now, I do want to clarify that at the time of speaking these words from my mouth, the Virtuality emulation itself is still very much a work in progress, and is nowhere near close to being ready for the public yet. And this is only talking about the 2000 series. In regards to the 3000 series, the emulation for it so far is pretty much non-existent. However, it has been confirmed that once the emulation does reach a usable state, it will be included in the main MAME code line.
So just patience, everyone.
However, in case you still find yourself in doubt about ever seeing the day Pac-Man VR gets revived, allow me to offer a bit more hope on the more legal side of things. Now, I slightly mentioned this before, but nowadays the rights to the Virtuality machines are owned by a separate company known as Virtuosity Tech, who, from what I can determine, are a company whose sole focus is to preserve and distribute these old arcade VR machines. But how did this even become the case? Well, if you're wondering what happened between then and now in regards to the acquisition of the Virtuality, I believe I can provide some backstory. So, apparently after the original manufacturing division known as Virtuality Entertainment, who created these original machines, went insolvent back in 1997, the rights to the entertainment machines, but not the brand, were sold to an organization known as Cybermind UK, while at the same time, all intellectual property consumer rights, as well as all Virtuality brand rights, were purchased by the original founder, Dr. Waldron. Then later on down the line, Cybermind UK was sold to Arcadian Virtual Reality LLC, a distribution company who were also the same people to make this initial website we looked at a while back. From there on, they operated in the US for a good while, until 2012, when finally, Arcadian Virtual Reality LLC were acquired by Virtuosity Tech Incorporated, which is still the case to this day. Confusing, I know. Anyways, the reason I'm even bringing all this up in the first place is because Virtuosity Tech themselves, remember they are the current owners, announced plans on their website to re-release Pac-Man VR alongside other Virtuality games on modern VR headsets, such as the Oculus and Valve Index and whatever the fuck PlayStation is doing, which, while sounds very exciting and cool and stuff, does unsurprisingly come with its own sample of too good to be true, as this supposed re-release announcement was made like 3 to 4 years ago with no updates or further comments on the matter since, which is great. Oh no, the big company gave false hope and never followed up on a promise! Quick, write down what else goes on in your daily life. Okay, maybe that's a little presumptuous. I'm sure they still intend to re-release all of Virtuality's games. I can't speak on their behalf, nor do I know the work it would take to actually get these dried up carcasses to run on modern hardware. All I'm saying is an update on the situation would be nice. Though, while we're still on the subject of Virtuosity Tech, I do want to take a look at this website of theirs where these bold claims were initially made. Welcome to Virtuosity Tech Incorporated, the worldwide distributor and manufacturing source for Virtuality, trademark, and Cybermind, trademark, virtual reality entertainment systems. So, according to my analysis, this entire website appears to be a place where one can mainly learn about the Virtuality system, view the hardware and games, and also rent out or even buy one of the arcade machines. Presumably. I say this because the Buy Now button doesn't seem to lead anywhere, nor do any of their social media icons at the top. Weird. Oh, and while we're on the subject of strange oddities with this site, here in their present situation section, it reads, Virtuosity Tech has also ported the software titles originally offered with the Virtuality systems to run on Windows, OS X, Xbox, and PS systems. Users can now purchase and play Dactyl Nightmare, Ghost Train, VR Missile Command, Virtual Boxing, Zone Hunter, Pac-Man VR, and Shoot for Loot on their current systems. Works with Oculus Rift. You did? Where? This place confuses me. What's also weird is they have a section dedicated to Virtuality software with only 8 labeled games. Clicking on them will, oddly enough, send you to the old Arcadian Virtual Reality website? The one we saw earlier? Wait, is this site dead or not? Maybe repurposed? Considering the original creators of that site are now owned by Virtuosity Tech, I guess that would make sense. Oh, and get this, every single game on here leads to its own respective promotional page, all except for, you guessed it, Pac-Man VR, which sends us to an error screen. Which is strange considering there is a promotional page for the game on this old website. My guess as to why this happens is because the link was probably meant to send you to the version of the page where you could have bought the game itself, but since they stopped doing that, decided to remove that link and just forgot to replace it, I guess. So yeah, essentially this site's fucking weird. I mean, to be fair, it does have a lot of useful and insightful information regarding the Virtuality, but also, you guys may want to update this thing.
And there you go, the job's done. Pac-Man VR is no longer the long-forgotten mystery it once was, and everyone can rest easy now knowing I, once again, have successfully cracked another case.
God, your character flaws do not get pointed out enough.
Pac-Man VR truly was that game that existed at some point. The information and backstory surrounding it is really just so fascinating to me. I can only hope that one day I'll actually get the chance to play it for myself on its original hardware. In general, just being able to experience the Virtuality would be kinda awesome. I've always had this fascination with outdated technology, mainly ones used for entertainment, which is why I wanted to research this thing in the first place. And even if I don't ever get the chance to try out Pac-Man VR the way it was originally intended, there's always the upcoming emulation, or the official re-release, which I hope actually comes to fruition. I'd definitely love to see a Virtuality collection that basically packages all the old titles for that thing into one game. The only issue I can see with that though is the licensing, mainly regarding Pac-Man VR, as I have no clue if Virtuosity Tech still has the rights to even republish that game considering its use of another company's IP. I don't know. I guess only time will tell. And if this is all being seen in the future, when Pac-Man VR is now publicly available to play by any means, then hope you still enjoyed hearing about the backstory. So I do have one last question. Is there any other interesting facts, either about Virtuality or about Pac-Man VR, that people may not know that you would like to share?
So I suppose that the main one was the one that I mentioned earlier on, that the difference in paradigm, you know, so with Pac-Man traditionally being a 2D game that you could see, you know, right in front of you, you could see the world in which you were inhabiting, and you could see where the ghosts were, you could see what happens when you change colour. Virtuality, the VR version didn't have that. In terms of the immersion into the game, it was almost a first-person shooter style, and in that way it was entirely different. The other aspect was how difficult it was to get the navigation right, and to figure out a way in the time that people had to play the machine, to play the game that they spent money on, albeit not much. They didn't have long to orientate themselves, so it wasn't just about the fidelity of the graphics, it wasn't just about the hardware, it was about making people feel that they'd had a meaningful and worthwhile experience in the small time that they had, and sometimes what that meant was dumbing down the experience as opposed to making it more sophisticated. And that was the paradox that existed, you know, and that's something that we were guilty of ignoring, was as we started to play the games more, like Buggy Ball and Pac-Man, we probably made them too difficult because we were getting so used to them that we were adding complexity to it. Buggy Ball, for example, had a tank. Not only did it have a tank, it had a tank that could shoot things. So you could shoot the ball. This is how ridiculous it got. Now, you know, we didn't really didn't need to add that.
Lastly, I want to give a huge thank you to Don McIntyre for letting me ask him an hour's worth of questions and for giving just the most in-detail, best explanations I could ask for, as well as everyone else like Ariane and Pacnatic for their willingness to indulge in my questions. And if you would like to listen to the full interview with Don McIntyre, which includes tons more information I wasn't able to fit in this video, then I will leave that linked in the description below. And with that, my work here is done. Huh. Color me impressed. You actually did a pretty good job on that. Thanks? Hey, that reminds me, why did you ask me to research this topic anyways? I mean, if you were gonna stay here the whole time, you probably could have just done it yourself, right? And now that I think about it, you never really gave a reason for the last time you were here either. After all you've put me through, I feel like I'm owed an explanation. Oh, and he's gone. Okay.
Looks like there's another mystery at hand.
Never mind. I'm over it.